Night pressed down on Essex, Maryland, in a way that made the air feel heavier than it should. The streets were almost empty, the kind of silence that tricks the mind into believing something is waiting just beyond the headlights. Patrol cars drifted through the dark like slow-moving guardians, unaware that the world they knew was about to fracture. A lone sedan sped past one of those cruisers, careless and loud in the stillness. Its taillights blinked wildly as it darted through the intersection. Officers took notice because the tags looked off, the kind of off that made training whisper warnings. They pulled the car over with easy routine, the sort of stop they had done hundreds of times. Speeding, fake tags, no license, mundane problems for a mundane night. The woman behind the wheel was tired-looking, 33, but worn in the way of someone who had been running from life far too long. Nicole Michelle Johnson. Her name came up with a sigh from their system. No license, no registration. The car was headed straight for impound, and she knew it. She moved with jittery haste as she gathered belongings from the cluttered backseat, mumbling to herself as she tried to stay ahead of the officer's instructions. That would have been the whole story. A simple citation, a routine tow, one more night added to the endless chain of nights where nothing extraordinary happens. Then the smell rolled out. It hit the officers without warning. A thick, rotten stench drifting from the trunk. Not the smell of trash, not the smell of spoiled food. Something older, something wrong, something that did not belong in the living world. They paused. One brief pause that changed everything. Nicole kept talking, pretending not to notice the shift in the air. She spoke in circles, strange sentences that never landed, trying to distract them while she dug through the mess. Her words spilled too fast, almost panicked, as if she knew the night was slipping out of her hands. One officer stepped closer to the trunk. The smell grew stronger, swallowing the last of the normal evening. The lid was slightly cracked, as if someone had opened it recently and forgotten to close it properly. A fly crawled across the metal edge. The officer swallowed and lifted the trunk fully. Inside, piles of trash bags and blankets were thrown together in chaotic layers, the contents shifting under their weight. There was no reason for a smell that powerful to come from simple garbage, no reason for the bags to be tied in such tight knots, no reason for the blankets to be wrapped like something fragile inside. Nicole stepped back as the officers began removing the layers. Her breathing hitched. Her hands trembled. Her friend, known only as BB, stood nearby in confusion, staring at the officers as if she genuinely had no idea what was happening. The officers kept digging, a towel, a blanket, another bag. The smell grew stronger, forcing one officer to turn away for a moment. Then another layer came off, and beneath it lay a small suitcase, old, stained, and bulging. The suitcase did not look dangerous. It looked ordinary, like the kind that should hold clothes or neglected belongings, but the edges were warped. The fabric was stiff. The zipper was rusted with something darker than dirt. An officer reached for it. Nicole whispered something under her breath, a broken little sound that barely left her throat. The suitcase opened. Inside was the shape of a small child, long past the point of saving. Skin, bone, silence. A life cut down and left to decay in the trunk of a car that had been driven for months. One officer staggered back, almost dropping to the pavement. Another froze, hands shaking in the cold July night. A third whispered a prayer into the darkness as the world they knew collapsed in on itself. Nicole stared at the open trunk like she had been waiting for this moment, her face contorted, her words turning into wild rambling. BB began crying, asking why they were being taken away, why officers were yelling, why the night suddenly felt like a nightmare. The officers tried to regain control, but the sight inside the suitcase clung to their thoughts like a shadow they could not escape. Sirens filled the air as backup rushed in. The night that should have ended with a speeding ticket instead unfolded into a crime scene, and as the officers stood around the trunk, staring at the suitcase and the horror it held, they knew the worst part wasn't what they had found. It was what they had yet to uncover. The parking lot lights flickered overhead as more officers arrived, their footsteps echoing across the asphalt. Crime scene tape stretched across the area, slicing the night into before and after. Investigators surrounded the trunk, each one trying to maintain professionalism while wrestling with the same suffocating disbelief. The suitcase remained open, its awful truth refusing to be ignored. The decomposed child lay curled within the lining, a small body that had once held laughter and warmth. Now it was evidence, a silent accusation against everyone who failed to notice the signs earlier. Homicide detectives moved in, faces pale but controlled. They documented every angle, every crease in the blanket, every tear in the bag. The officers who first opened the trunk kept their distance. Their eyes were red. Their hands trembled despite their attempts to appear steady. Nicole sat on the curb, rocking slightly, muttering to herself in fragments of sentences that never formed meaning. She rambled about being tired, about being set up, about how she had been trying her best. Her words tumbled like broken glass. Bibi stood beside her, still confused, still asking why she was being held, still trying to understand how a simple car ride turned into a nightmare with police lights flickering around her. One detective approached the trunk carefully and began peeling back more layers around the suitcase. He was looking for signs of how long the body had been there, whether the child had been moved, whether there was anything else hidden within the trunk. Then he froze. Beneath the suitcase, under another blanket, lay a second bundle, smaller, tighter, wrapped with a level of precision that spoke of panic rather than care. The detective hesitated before opening it. Another officer turned away, unable to watch. Inside the bundle was another set of remains, even smaller, even more heartbreaking. Another child, trapped in the same prison of neglect and silence. 2 children. 2 lives extinguished. 2 bodies hidden and driven around as if they were nothing more than luggage. The investigators exhaled sharp breaths that felt like cold steel in their lungs. It was no longer a simple discovery. It was a fully unfolding tragedy that had months of secrecy behind it. As evidence piled up, contradictions poured from Nicole's trembling lips. She claimed accidents. She claimed confusion. She claimed fear. But the timelines clashed. The details shifted. Her stories bent under the weight of the truth. The more she spoke, the more the detectives realized something had been unraveling in her life long before the traffic stop. Neglect, desperation, avoidance, months of pretending the problem did not exist while the bodies remained in her trunk. Bibi seemed genuinely lost, her shock palpable. She insisted she didn't know. She insisted she never opened the trunk. She insisted she had nothing to hide. Investigators noted her panic, the sincere confusion swirling in her eyes. A detective pulled open Nicole's phone messages. What he found twisted the atmosphere even further. Months of silence, weeks of excuses, missed check-ins, friends asking where the children were, Nicole responding with vague reassurances that never matched reality. Then one final message, a chilling line that offered no explanation, just a raw glimpse into her collapsing world. "I'll fix it soon," but soon had never come, and now the truth was spilling out under the harsh white lights of the parking lot. As the detectives pieced together each broken fragment of the night, they realized there was still one unanswered question. Why? Why had Nicole kept the bodies hidden for months? Why had she driven around with death sealed in her trunk? Why had she let the world believe everything was fine while everything was already lost? The night ended with Nicole handcuffed, trembling, whispering to herself as she was led toward the transport vehicle. Bibi followed, still insisting she did not understand. The officers who first opened the trunk stood silent, replaying the moment over and over in their minds. And while the scene closed down, the detectives knew the real truth was waiting for them in interviews, in autopsy reports, in timelines that would expose the full depth of negligence and deception. The case was no longer about a traffic stop. It was about how two children vanished without anyone noticing. Morning broke over Essex with a kind of dull gray sky that felt appropriate for the darkness beneath it. Inside the interrogation rooms, detectives prepared to separate truth from the chaos Nicole had left behind. Nicole sat slumped in her chair, exhausted, eyes hollow. Her story stumbled. She contradicted herself. She cried. She rambled. She claimed she had been overwhelmed, claimed she had nowhere to go, claimed she had been afraid to tell anyone what happened. But excuses crumble when faced with evidence. Autopsy reports arrived first. The children had died months earlier. The older child had suffered injuries long before death. The younger one had starved. Their bodies had been placed in the trunk shortly after, wrapped in a suitcase and blankets that still carried faint traces of the life they once lived. Detectives lined up the timeline, cross-checked every statement, every message, every movement. They mapped the months of silence, the empty excuses, the evasive updates Nicole had given to anyone who asked. The truth emerged like a slow-forming storm. She had not sought help. She had not reported their deaths. She had hidden them, driven with them, lived with them in the trunk as if the truth could stay buried as long as she kept moving. BB's story held steady. She had been unaware. Investigators found no signs she contributed to the concealment. No evidence that she knew the children were dead. Her confusion on the night of the stop had been real. The power shifted sharply now. Nicole no longer controlled the narrative. Each piece of evidence stripped away the last illusions she tried to paint. Detectives confronted her with the suitcase, the timeline, the autopsies, her own messages. Slowly, her defenses crumbled. She whispered that she did not mean for things to get this far. She said she was scared, said she was alone, but fear and loneliness do not excuse months of silence while two children remained hidden in the dark. The justice system moved swiftly, charges stacked against her, first-degree child abuse, negligent manslaughter, neglect resulting in death, failure to report a corpse. Every law she had broken stood tall and unyielding against her. The courtroom felt colder than the interrogation room. Nicole entered with her hands shaking, weighed down by the reality she had spent months trying to ignore. Prosecutors laid out the timeline with clinical precision. Investigators described the night with voices that cracked despite their training. And then came the photographs, the suitcase, the blankets, the trunk, the children. The jury needed no more explanation. Nicole was found guilty. The verdict landed with the kind of finality that felt like the closing scene of a tragedy too cruel to comprehend. Justice did not resurrect the children, but it reclaimed the silence that hid their suffering. The officers who had opened the trunk stood outside the courthouse later that day. They had been changed in a way they would carry forever. The memory of the suitcase remained etched into their minds, a constant reminder of how easily horror can hide in plain sight. But justice had spoken. Truth had been dragged into the open. The children who had been lost in silence were finally acknowledged, finally seen, finally given the dignity denied to them in life. As the courthouse doors closed, one final thought lingered in the air. A speeding car had been pulled over by chance. A simple traffic stop had cracked open a hidden darkness, and in the end, truth found its way out of the trunk. It always does.